You know, we all think we know the story of the Tower of Babel, right? Humanity gets a little too big for its britches, decides to build a skyscraper all the way up to heaven, and bam, God scrambles their languages. It's the go-to explanation for why we all need translation apps on our phones. But what if that's not really what the story is about at all?
What if the height of that tower was never the real problem? What if the real rebellion, the thing that caused such a massive divine reaction, was about something way deeper? Something that had been bubbling up since the very beginning of the story.
See, the real sin of Babel, the one that completely reshaped the spiritual map of the world, wasn't about bricks and mortar. Nope. It was about this desperate, defiant quest for humanity to make a name for themselves.
To really get what's happening at Babel, you can't look at it as a one-off event. You have to see it for what it is, the climax of a three-act play of rebellion that unfolds in early Genesis. It's the final act in this pattern of things just getting more and more out of whack. Okay, so Act 1, Eden. That's where humanity tried to grab divine status on its own terms, to be like God. Then comes Act 2, in Genesis 6, where heavenly beings cross a line and corrupt human nature itself. That mess was so bad it took a flood to deal with it. And that brings us to Act 3, Babel, where humanity tries to grab and institutionalize a corrupted kind of authority for themselves. So what's the common thread tying all of these rebellions together? Well, it's that phrase again, the quest for a name. And to really understand what that means, we have to rewind a bit to the spooky legacy of those figures from Genesis 6, the Nephilim.
The Bible calls the Nephilim the mighty men who were of old, the men of name. Now this is so important. Their name wasn't just about being famous, it was a reputation for power, for dominance that they got through rebellion and violence. It was a status they seized for themselves, not one that was given to them by God.
And right here, this is the aha moment. This is the direct link. The text says the Nephilim were the men of name. And then just a few chapters later, what do the people at Babel say? Let us make a name for ourselves. They're not just using similar words by accident. They are deliberately trying to copy that same playbook, to build a legacy of illicit, stolen power through their own united efforts.
So here's the bottom line. The sin of Babel wasn't about inventing new technology or being great engineers. It was theological defiance, plain and simple. It was humanity trying to guarantee its own identity, its own legacy, and its own access to divine power, completely cutting God out of the picture. They wanted to seize the authority to define good and evil, life and death for themselves.
Okay, so if the sin was that big, then the judgment had to match it. And it was so much bigger than just confusing some languages. What happened at Babel was basically a cosmic divorce between God and the nations.
Later on, in other parts of the Bible, the curtain gets pulled back and we see what really went down. This verse from Deuteronomy is the key. It says that when God scattered humanity, he didn't just walk away. He actually, as a judicial act, handed them over to the authority of other spiritual beings.
This whole event is what biblical scholars call the disinheritance of the nations. Because of humanity's unified rebellion, God basically says, okay, you don't want me? Fine. He withdraws his direct rule and allots the 70 nations of the world to these subordinate divine rulers, the sons of God. This one act sets up the cosmic conflict that drives the rest of the biblical story. And it's the immediate reason why God's very next move is to call one man, Abraham, to start a whole new nation for himself, right in the middle of this chaos.
But the story doesn't end there. With humanity disinherited and divided? No way. All of that was just setting the stage for God's incredible answer, a moment in history that directly reverses the curse of Babel and changes everything, the day of Pentecost.
And the reversal is it's perfect. It's so direct. At Babel, God took one language and fractured it into many to scatter a rebellious humanity. But at Pentecost, God takes many languages and multiplies the ability to speak so that a repentant humanity from every single one of those scattered nations can be gathered back together.
And it goes even deeper, all the way back to our main theme. Remember Babel's defiant shout, "Let us make a name for ourselves"? Well, that's completely overturned by Pentecost's gracious invitation. The very thing humanity tried to steal, a name that gives you identity, security, and authority, is now freely given to anyone who accepts salvation in the name of Jesus Christ.
This is the ultimate fix. Where humanity's rebellion tried to seize a name, Christ's perfect obedience earned him the name that is above every name. He restores the proper order of the universe. True authority isn't seized from below, it's granted from above.
And it's in his name that all those disinherited nations can finally be welcomed back home.
So, a story that began with this rebellious attempt to build a unified human empire ends with a divine invitation into a unified spiritual family. Babel isn't just some ancient myth about why we speak different languages. It's a profound story about identity, authority, and the deep divisions that still mark our world. Which kind of leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? If Pentecost was the beginning of the end for Babel's curse, what part do we play in continuing to heal those divisions today?